America tried to isolate India, but got humiliated instead. Think about that for a moment. The same America that once believed it could dictate the terms of the world order, the same America that thought it could pull the strings and decide which nation rises and which nation falls, suddenly finds itself facing a country that refuses to be bent, refuses to be bullied, refuses to be isolated. That country is India, and the world is watching as history takes a dramatic turn. Because let's be real, America has played this game for decades. Whenever a country got too strong, too independent, too bold, they tried to cut it off, sanction it, shame it, or trap it. They believed the world could only function under their rules, under their money, under their power. But this time, the story didn't play out the way Washington planned, because India is not just another nation. They are a civilization, a force, an idea that cannot be caged. America thought it could embarrass India, surround it diplomatically, choke its economy, but instead America got the shock of its life. You see, isolation is a weapon. It's psychological warfare. They did it to Russia, they did it to Iran, they even tried to do it to China. The idea is simple. If you cut off the supply of resources, markets, and global networks, that nation will crawl back, begging for approval. But here's the part America never understood about India. This is not a nation that begs. This is not a country that crawls. This is a country that has faced colonization, starvation, partition, wars, sanctions, betrayals, yet every single time it stood back up taller, stronger, prouder. When you push India into a corner, you don't weaken it, you awaken it. And America just learned that the hard way. What happened when Washington tried to rally allies to isolate India? They expected Europe to fall in line. They expected Asia to be pressured. They expected Africa to look away. But the opposite happened. Nations that once feared speaking against American power started leaning toward India. They saw something different in New Delhi. They saw courage. They saw a country that refuses to be dictated to, a country that acts in its own interest, not in the shadow of someone else's empire. While America was lecturing India about oil purchases, military ties, trade agreements, India was quietly building bridges across continents. While Washington threatened sanctions, India was signing billion-dollar deals in energy, defense, and technology with powers that refused to play America's game. And here's the truth. The world is tired of bullies. The world is tired of double standards. For decades, America preached democracy but supported dictators, spoke of freedom but destroyed nations, demanded peace but sold weapons. People see through the hypocrisy now. And when they looked at India, they saw something refreshing. They saw a nation that doesn't impose, doesn't invade, doesn't force its ideology onto others. Instead, it offers partnership, respect, and a shared future. That's why countries didn't follow Washington's call to isolate India. That's why America got humiliated instead. Because for the first time in a long time, the majority of the world said, "No, we're not isolating India, we're standing with it." Look at what happened in Africa. For decades, America ignored the continent, treating it as a pawn. But India stepped in with respect, investment, and genuine partnership. When America tried to shame India for buying Russian oil, African nations applauded India's independence because they too are tired of being told what to do. Look at the Middle East, once America's stronghold. India now has deeper ties with the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Israel simultaneously. Nations that can't stand each other still trust India as a balancing force. That's not isolation, that's influence. Look at Asia, Southeast Asia, Central Asia, East Asia. Countries there know that America's interest in the region is purely strategic, but India's interest is cultural, historical, civilizational. They trust India more. And while all this was happening, America underestimated India's biggest weapon, its people. 1. 4 billion citizens, a youth population larger than the entire U.S. population, a tech industry that's rewriting the global economy, a defense industry that's rapidly modernizing, a diaspora that's influencing politics, science, and business in every corner of the world. How do you isolate that? You can't. You can't shut out a civilization that has existed for 5,000 years, that survived empires, invasions, and colonization. You can't erase a nation that has the fastest growing economy in the world. You can't silence a culture that has given the world yoga, philosophy, mathematics, medicine, spirituality, and now digital technology and space exploration. America thought it could, but it only ended up exposing its own weakness. And let's talk about humiliation. Humiliation comes when you bet everything on a move, but it backfires in front of the world. America thought if they pressured India hard enough, India would bend. But instead, America had to swallow its pride and come back to the negotiating table. Do you realize what that means? For the first time, Washington was forced to admit that India cannot be ignored, cannot be sidelined, cannot be treated like a second-class player. They had to recognize India as an equal, not as a follower. That's humiliation for an empire that's used to giving orders and having everyone obey. India played it brilliantly. It didn't shout, it didn't provoke, it didn't kneel. It simply stood firm. When told not to buy oil, India said, "Our people need energy, and we will buy it from whoever we want." When told not to develop weapons with Russia, India said, "We will build partnerships based on our interests." When told to take sides in global conflicts, India said, "We stand for peace, but we will not be pressured into camps." That's strength, that's leadership, that's independence, and the more India refused to bend, the more the world respected it. The more America pushed, the more the global South rallied behind India. In the end, Washington looked desperate, while New Delhi looked confident. That's what humiliation looks like, and let's be honest, this isn't just about geopolitics. This is about a shift in mindset. For decades, the world believed power only flowed from the West, but today the East is rising. And at the heart of that rise is India. For years, America thought China would be the only challenger. But what really stings Washington is that India, once written off as poor, chaotic, and dependent, is now shaping the future of technology, space, defense, and global trade. When Silicon Valley runs on Indian talent, when NASA relies on Indian-origin scientists, when Wall Street invests billions in Indian startups, how do you isolate India? You can't. And yet, America tried. They tried through media campaigns, trying to paint India as unstable, undemocratic, unreliable. They tried through pressure groups, trying to push India into policy changes. They tried through alliances, using NATO and G7 to corner India. But here's the reality. They couldn't break India's spirit, because India doesn't just survive on economics or politics. It survives on identity, on civilizational pride, on cultural strength. That's something America can never understand. You can sanction oil, you can pressure banks, you can write headlines, but you cannot crush a nation that believes its destiny is to rise. That's why America was humiliated, because for the first time, the world saw a nation stare the empire in the eye and say, "We will not bow." And not only did India survive, it thrived. The economy grew, global respect grew, military strength grew, and soft power expanded. That's not isolation. That's ascension, and America had to sit there, frustrated, realizing that the old tricks don't work anymore. And let me tell you something, the world loves an underdog story. The world loves to see a country rise against the odds, and that's why so many nations are rallying behind India right now. Because India represents hope that no matter how powerful an empire is, no matter how much money or influence they hold, they cannot control everyone forever. Sooner or later, a nation stands up and says enough. India is that nation today, and the message it sends is clear. If India can stand up to America and win respect, so can others. That's why the global South is uniting, that's why multipolarity is the future, and that's why America's humiliation is historic. India didn't just avoid isolation, it turned the threat into an opportunity. Every time America tried to close one door, India opened 5 others. Every time Washington applied pressure, India built new partnerships. That's called strategy, that's called wisdom, that's called resilience. And that's why the story of America trying to isolate India but ending up humiliated will be remembered for decades. Because it wasn't just a diplomatic failure, it was a signal to the world. The age of Western dominance is fading, and the age of balanced power is here. So the next time someone tells you that a nation can be silenced, remember India's story. Remember how a country of 4 billion refused to be boxed in. Remember how America, with all its power, had to backtrack. And remember, this true strength is not about following orders. It's about writing your own destiny. India is writing its destiny now, and no one, not even America, can erase it, because America tried to isolate India, but instead, America got isolated from reality. America got humiliated on the global stage. And India rose higher than ever before. America miscalculated because it viewed India as a follower, but the world now recognizes India as an independent pole of power. For too long, Washington assumed that India's role in the international order would be limited to obedience, a country that would align quietly behind Western strategies without ever demanding the right to set its own terms. They believed India could be swayed with promises, pressured with sanctions, and cornered with diplomatic games. But what unfolded shattered that illusion. This was not the India of the 20th century struggling to recover from partition, poverty, and colonial scars. This was the India of the 21st century, confident, ambitious, resilient, and unwilling to play second fiddle to anyone. The attempt to treat India as a junior partner became the very mistake that exposed America's outdated world. And accelerated India's emergence as an independent global power. It marked the birth of India's assertive military doctrine backed by innovation. For decades, India relied heavily on foreign technology and imported defense systems, often dictated by larger powers. America believed that if they controlled the flow of weapons and intelligence, they could dictate India's military decisions. But New Delhi turned this dependency into a reason to innovate. It invested heavily in indigenous defense technology, pushing the creation of missiles like Agni and Akash, fighter programs like Tejas, and naval projects like INS Arihant. Each of these projects wasn't just hardware. It was a declaration that India would not be dependent anymore. When America tried to leverage arms deals to pressure India into compliance, India responded by doubling down on its defense autonomy. That was the moment the world realized this country was writing its own military doctrine, not borrowing someone else's playbook. This doctrine is not about aggression for the sake of dominance, but about deterrence backed by innovation. It recognizes that the old global order where one power dictates terms is fading fast, replaced by a multipolar world where respect is earned through resilience and capability. America miscalculated by assuming India's doctrine would always echo Washington's. But India's real doctrine is built on civilizational wisdom combined with modern technology, blending strategic restraint with overwhelming retaliatory capacity. The West kept waiting for India to simply follow their models of warfare, but instead India produced a hybrid philosophy, silent strength, patient buildup, and technological surprises that catch adversaries off guard. This is why attempts to corner India militarily only pushed it further into becoming a defense innovator, not a dependent buyer. Every embargo, every restriction, Every threat from the West only accelerated India's independence. Consider the nuclear tests in 1998. America tried to isolate India for taking a bold step outside the non-proliferation framework designed to keep certain nations privileged. Sanctions were imposed, partnerships were withdrawn, and Washington expected India to regret its decision. But what happened? India's scientists, engineers, and military leaders worked harder, developed indigenous capabilities, and transformed the nation into a declared nuclear power with a credible deterrent. The sanctions backfired by forcing India to stand on its own feet. What was supposed to humble India only proved its ability to achieve the impossible under pressure. This story repeated itself across multiple sectors: space exploration, missile defense, cybersecurity, and digital infrastructure. America assumed India would stumble without external support, but instead India soared because of internal resolve. The recognition of India as an independent pole of power came slowly but decisively. The more Washington tried to dictate terms, the more India stood firm, reminding the world that it was not another pawn in someone else's chess game. America could not understand why India refused to join alliances blindly, why it continued buying oil from Russia despite threats, why it pursued ties with both Israel and Iran, why it refused to be boxed into the category of a U.S. ally or a Chinese rival. The truth was simple. India had matured beyond the binary choices the West likes to offer. It would not be labeled. It would not be confined. It would act on its own national interest, and in doing so, it sent a clear signal to every nation in the global South. Sovereignty is possible, independence is achievable, and no empire can forever dictate the rules. What humiliated America most was not just that India refused to bend, but that other nations began admiring this courage. Countries in Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia looked at India and saw a model: how to deal with pressure from superpowers without losing dignity. For decades, smaller nations felt they had to choose sides or face isolation. India showed them another path, the path of self-confidence, where partnerships are chosen based on benefit, not fear. The more India spoke of strategic autonomy, the more others saw a leader they could trust. This was no longer about one country surviving sanctions or pressure. This was about a shift in global perception. America's attempt to isolate India ended up amplifying India's role as a voice for the majority of nations who no longer wanted to be dictated to. America miscalculated in another critical way. They thought India's strength was only economic growth and market size. They ignored the cultural and civilizational power that runs deeper than any GDP chart. When you underestimate a civilization that has survived thousands of years, endured invasions, colonization, and still preserved its identity, you are making a mistake no strategist should ever make. India's confidence is not rooted only in technology or trade, but in the unshakable belief that its time has come. That belief cannot be sanctioned, it cannot be isolated, it cannot be humiliated. America looked at India through the narrow lens of economics and strategy, but the world saw India as a rising civilizational force, one that cannot be treated like a follower because it never was one even within the realm of technology. India refused to play follower. The digital revolution led by Aadhaar, UPI, and India Stack reshaped the global perception of what a developing country could achieve. America thought they controlled the tech game with Silicon Valley, but India built a digital infrastructure at a national scale that even developed nations couldn't match. That independence in technology became part of its broader assertion of power. While the West talked about exclusion, India built inclusion: digital payment systems, satellite launches for developing nations, vaccine diplomacy during the pandemic. These weren't just policies, they were statements of leadership. The world noticed that leadership, and slowly the narrative shifted. India was not waiting to be led. India was leading. America's humiliation also came from the failure of its prediction models. They predicted that India, facing the pressure of isolation, would compromise. But what they didn't understand was India's willingness to endure short-term pain for long-term sovereignty. This is the essence of civilizational thinking. While others play for the next election cycle, India plays for the next century. That is why every attempt to restrict it only sharpened its focus. America is used to nations scrambling under economic pressure, but India didn't scramble. It adapted, it restructured, and it kept moving forward. That resilience shook Washington because it proved that their playbook of isolation no longer guaranteed victory. The turning point was when America realized that India was not only surviving, but thriving without approval. Every year, its economy grew faster than most major economies. Every year, its military tested new systems. Every year, its diplomacy expanded its reach from Africa to the Arctic. The image of India as a developing country waiting for validation collapsed. The new image was of a nation charting its own course. For Washington, this was humiliation because it revealed a decline in their influence. For the world, it was inspiration because it revealed the rise of an independent pole of power. India's assertive doctrine of independence is no longer about choice, it's about destiny. It showed the world that when you innovate at home, when you trust your people, when you act from strength, no one can isolate you. America miscalculated because it looked at India as just another country in its strategic orbit. But the world now sees India as a gravitational force in itself, pulling nations, shaping policies, and influencing the direction of the 21st century. This is not a follower, this is not a sidekick. This is a civilization stepping into leadership, and no amount of humiliation attempted by others can change that.